Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was absolutely diabolical. Welcome back to another recap, breakdown, and review of The Boys Season 4, Episode 5. And this episode was nuts once again, especially getting into some souped-up animals. And we had some further revelations and teasers that I think leads to even more theories that have been out there for a while with Joe Kessler. Homelander has definitely, ever since last episode with the Red Room, taken things to the next stage with his plan for soup domination. And we definitely need to talk about that and everything else. So all that's left to say is can't wait to see what you guys say down in the comments below about this episode. Let me know any theories that you have. I'd love to discuss them with you. Leave a like on this video if you want to see more content like this with the boys, and do consider subscribing for more reviews just like this. So at the very beginning, what I liked about this episode is obviously the V52 Expo, because this had a lot of, I guess you could say, piss taking, or at least as we would say here in the UK, of a bunch of things. It just kind of reminds you of like an MCU lineup. I mean, I guess they called it the VCU timeline, phases 7 through 19. We picked up with Homelander and Sage trying to talk to him, but this is that first inkling you get of Homelander having this new front after, I guess, shedding his humanity last episode. And we'll get into a little bit of that, because I think, if you really want to say if there's any humanity left in Homelander, there is a little bit of a shred, and that could all come down to Ryan and how this could impact him into the 5th and final season. But what I absolutely want to kind of jump to straight away is the repercussions of Huey's dad having compound V. And obviously we knew that Huey's mum gave it to Huey's dad, and this whole time I was waiting, okay, what powers is he gonna have? And you get a little bit of a glimpse at what's coming when he doesn't remember where Huey's mum went. And I was like, oh man, obviously this has got something to do with him being given compound V when he had suffered a stroke and was essentially brain dead. After all, that's why the doctors wanted to, shut off his life support. And so this is when the next part of this story in the episode, Huey comes back from getting a drink and his dad is gone. And he's just standing in a room after having killed a nurse, like having ripped her heart out, Homelander style, and he doesn't recognize Huey. Now, what I like about what the boys has done in this episode is that obviously this is, an amalgamation of the boys' craziness, wackiness, edginess, over the top, gore and violence. But Huey and, what the family went through this episode was also very touching and sad to see. I have to say that Simon Pegg was absolutely amazing in this episode, and, it's going to be gutting to not really see him anymore given where things end off with his character. Obviously they couldn't let that continue, and the demonstration of his powers, he's freaking like phasing like the Flash, which was a pretty cool power. He even phased into that guy, that patient in the bed right in the middle of his body. It was really nuts, because you really cared in this moment about the characters, but then the boys compliments that sentimental feeling. I don't know if I should say the word compliments, but just, mixes it up in a cocktail with the boys' absolute over-the-top stuff, which, I think we've all grown to appreciate. So it's going to be interesting now seeing where Huey's, life goes with regards to his mum now that he doesn't have his father. They've already reconnected, as we know, and I guess they're going to connect even more over this with how things end off this episode. And honestly, I got a bit teary at some points, and I remember thinking to myself, like, it's crazy how I can be like so, shock factored up with some of the stuff that's happening, but then, with the performances from Simon Pegg and Jack Quaid, it's just, it's some great stuff. And then after the initial Huey moments with his family, we have Firecracker on her show looking to press charges on Starlight. I have to say, I was pretty glad that they addressed this, because it's something I failed to mention in my review, but I was wondering, how is she not getting arrested? Like, she was caught in 4K committing battery on someone. No matter how provoked it was, that's still a crime. And you guys know me. In reviews, I try and be as comprehensive as I can be. I still love the show, but if there's some stuff in the writing that I think, hey, that didn't really make sense, or there's some plot armor here, which there was later on in the episode, I usually try and point that out. So I'm glad that they did address that, although if nothing comes of it, after this, then I guess, did Firecracker ever even push charges, or does the case get dropped? I don't know. I know for some of you that's nitpicky, but it is kind of relevant because, it's a logical thing that you should follow through on a show. But obviously, Starlight in this episode, along with many characters this season seems to have a bit of a theme of tortured souls, whether that's Kimiko with her past, Frenchie with his past, now Annie with kind of her past with what Firecracker pointed out last episode. Starlight is very much so reconciling with that, and especially Frenchie with what he goes on to do towards the very end. But when we're back at the V52 Expo, we get a little bit of a follow-up in the beginning threads of the story this season of A-Train and Sage, because A-Train is something that I've been mentioning in my last episode review, that I do think he's gonna bite the dust this season. I feel like he's a ticking time bomb before Homelander finds out. Now you can tell that they're obviously writing it in that, oh no wait, maybe A-Train has it handled. We have that moment initially where Sage is like, I'm working on the leak. That footage just didn't run itself out of crime analytics, am I right? So, Sage knows. She's one of the smartest people in the world, so she knows, and A-Train gets very spooked by this, but despite the efforts he goes through, he kind of gets a bit psyched out there and goes and tells Ashley, and Ashley immediately starts, shiting her pants and thinks, I'm going to go tell Homelander, but then we know that A-Train basically knows more about her and threatens her with that. So it seems that he's maybe on top of it, but I wouldn't get too used to feeling comfortable with him keeping things under wraps. Again, Sage still knows, and I think it's only a matter of time, but I do think it's going to be, shown and depicted through, if A-Train dies, he's going to go out doing something that I guess adds another notch in his, I don't know if you want to call it redemptive arc, but I think if he does die, it will be doing something good and something that his brother will be informed about, and how he made, an effort to change before he passed away. And as I said as well, I think Huey could be the one who tells him that. Now, at the V52 Expo, we also had that moment where Sam and Kate come out. We knew that Sam and Kate from Gen V would be appearing in this season thanks to the trailer, and I've been waiting to see, how they're going to be involved. And with that Homelander scene at the end, it really does seem as though they're signed up. Not only are they getting their own movie or whatever it is, but especially after the end of Gen V, we know how emboldened Sam and Kate are to kind of be on the side of, well, basically what Homelander said in that speech at the end, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But they're definitely on the side of supe domination. Let's put it that way. Now, Homelander, as we know, when we revisit his story with Ryan in this episode, things are getting very interesting. After he shed his humanity, he seems to be a lot more of a patient father, and it seems like, maybe, what's going on here? Maybe he's got to try and get a bit closer to his son, but as we know, for a very specific reason. He's taking a new approach to parenting here, trying to be a lot more understanding. And I do think there's like a thread of sincerity there, because as he points out to Ryan, he's been manipulated by people his whole life, and he doesn't want the same thing to happen to him. But he's also doing it because this caring and understanding father role that he's now taking is influencing Ryan to get a bit of a, funnily enough, an ego trip of his own, because he's still a kid and he's still very impressionable, even though it seemed like he was being pushed away from Homelander's direction. Like, Ryan's not stupid. Even though he's a kid, he could see who his father is. But now his father's being a bit more compassionate towards Ryan. It's like, oh, maybe I can, roll with my dad a bit more. And not only that, since I've opened myself up to being a little bit more vulnerable, I can now be influenced by him a little bit more. And we see this initially where he's being pitched his debut series, Super School. And, as we know about Ryan, he's not really about fake saves, fake movies, and things like that. The whole Vought thing with heroes. And when Homelander asks him, what does he want to do? Like, actually in the bigger picture, for a second here, it's like, oh, okay, he is, most certainly not wanting to be like his dad, because he said he actually wants to help people, not with fake saves, but actually help. So Ryan genuinely being a superhero in the world of the boys, because it's what his mum would want, and Ryan does obviously have a good nature in him compared to that of his father. However, this is where we see that impressionable side of Ryan, and where that mix of him wanting to help people and Homelander taking the opportunity to be like, hey, here's a situation where you can help someone, but with a little bit of deviation thrown in there, because they get the assistant to admit that Adam is making her feel uncomfortable, because as we know, Adam is a bit of a commentary on that workplace creep, and that he should apologize. And then Homelander gives him a few suggestions in how, maybe, you should make him do it again. So he's like, I think you should get on your knees and apologize. But then it ends up in instructing the assistant to slap Adam repeatedly. And you can hear the sound effects even when it's off screen. It doesn't stop. It just keeps going. Slap, slap, slap. And you can see that Ryan, through this suggestion and new somewhat beginning of a bond with Homelander, as he's drinking his drink, he's kind of low-key sadistically enjoying it. And these are like the very early, I guess you could say, formations of a bit of a power trip that could turn him down that path of becoming, well, the person that Ryan initially didn't want to end up being. So it's going to be interesting to see what other things this new parenting method of Homelander can get Ryan to do, and if Butcher can still interrupt that. Because if Ryan is feeling like he's being heard from his dad, he wants to save people, but doesn't realize the ironic thing here with what Homelander said, that he's actually being manipulated by Homelander to kind of be a bit more edgy without him realizing it, then this isn't going to be good. But going back to the Homelander humanity thing, we can't forget how Homelander says that from now on, there's no more rules for either of them, and that he doesn't care what anyone else thinks but Ryan. So if Ryan, despite where things might go with him after this moment, maybe he's going to indulge in a few more power trippy moments subtly, if he does eventually steer away from that, I think no matter what still, Ryan is a bit of Homelander's weakness. If he only cares about what his kid thinks, he might very well be the last tether to any shred of humanity that Homelander might still have, and that could come into play a little bit later. Now, as for like personal stories, I don't know about you guys, but I've got one bit on here, and that is, Janine's getting into a fight at school, and she's learning the violence from her father. I just feel like hasn't really got any story this season of his own compared to that of Kimiko and Frenchie. It's kind of the same old thing, and we barely really touch upon it. Now, I'm not saying is a bad character. I actually really enjoyed him this episode, and more on that in a little bit, but I have seen a few of you point out as well that isn't really being given much other than his role as the boy's dad, if you will, and how stressed out he is from everybody always causing chaos all the time. So I don't know, I just thought that it's just a bit of a shame where, his personal story is kind of being put to the wayside a little bit in favor of, other characters in the boys like, Frenchie, Kimiko, and Starlight, and Huey. But, I understand that it's hard to develop every single character with a cast this big, and who's to say that this won't lead into even bigger things for his personal storyline with scenes later on in this season. Maybe something bad could actually happen with Janine. Now, meanwhile with Butcher, we see him with Joe Kessler. But is he really? That is something that I think is very obvious at this point in how Joe Kessler is, and was a real person, somebody that Butcher spent time with in his early days, but I don't think he's really there, and I know I'm pointing out the obvious because a lot of people are saying it, and it's just simply another hallucination, just like Becca is. The way I think you could look at this is that Becca is the angel on Butcher's shoulder with those little hallucination scenes we see of her, and Joe Kessler is more of the kind of devil's advocate. It's like, hey, maybe you don't need the boys. You should do this mission by yourself without them. That's the part of Butcher's mind who's like, hey, I'm going to make a deal with, Neuman, like we saw a few episodes ago. And I know he didn't go through with it, but that's, again, an example of maybe the Kessler side of him, whereas Becca's the side where, he should be approaching things in a bit of a different way, such as the very reason why he didn't go through that Neuman deal, because Becca spoke to him and he didn't give those files over to Neuman, but rather it was a booty pick. So I do like what they're doing with Butcher, having a bit of a devil and angel on his shoulders as he's experiencing these hallucinations. But the big thing for Butcher and the boys this episode was that he revealed that he is very much so aware of a virus that kills supes, and it latches onto the V in their bloodstream, and it ends up fucking diabolical. So they are all about getting a hold of the virus, and the thing is they're going to have to get it from Neuman, and so they go and see none other other than Giancarlo Esposito's Stan Edgar. They offer him a presidential pardon in order for his help to get the virus, because maybe he knows where Neuman would keep it, and they even tempt him to do that through offering him custody of Zoe, because he's not particularly happy that Neuman injected Zoe with Compound V. And so Stan does eventually lead them to where the virus was being developed. So this is where they follow that blood trail, and things get very nuts. So initially they stumble across that virology lab, which is experimenting with Temp V. Butcher gets a little bit of a soft heart for the bunny rabbit and unplugs the bunny rabbit from the Temp V and lets it go. But as we see in the woods a little bit later, that bunny rabbit ended up dying through all of the Temp V that it's been given. I'm sure it was a bit further along than what Butcher was, but the main thing that came out of this is that it revealed what Butcher has in his body, and that is what I like to call the Baldur's Gate 3 tadpole. You saw that little freaking, tendril come out, and you can see that Butcher started to really put it together that, oh, maybe this is why I blacked out. And we did have ask, what happened with Ezekiel, and he says, I don't know, I blacked out. But at this point, he must be thinking, oh, this thing is in me, and, it's got a mind of its own. And I'm still wondering, by the way, I know I rambled a lot about it last episode in that review, but does it always lead to certain death? Or is there a bit of symbiotic relationship where this little tadpole doesn't want the host to die because, if the host dies, I assume that tadpole dies. Or maybe not. Maybe it incubates for a bit, and then it, hops out of the body and then, crawls along by itself like a symbiote would. I don't know, but, it is very interesting to see where things are going to go with the tadpole now that we've seen it actually come out of a rabbit. But anyway, back on point, this is when Neuman arrives, and this is where there's a little bit of a truce happening. It's quite a funny, pair up, all the boys, Neuman, the head popper, Stan Edgar. What a group to have at a party. But obviously something very wrong happened here, because there's blood, there's lab assistants having died, and Neuman is, quite worried about Samir, because we learn that Samir is indeed Zoe's father. But not only that, he's very important because he's one of the few people, if not the only one left, who can actually continue to develop the virus. So in true boys fashion, this is where we get a little bit of a taste of the soup chickens, which was a brilliant scene. I was looking forward to this ever since I saw it in the trailer. As Butcher said, it's a Kentucky Fried Massacre. As these scenes unfold, we have a few hiccups that happen with Butcher, or should I say that everyone learning that Butcher had a deal with Neuman, but as he said, he didn't go through with it. And to be honest, I think that will stick with MM. Ultimately, he didn't go through with it, even though Annie is always the first to be like, see, this guy's never going to change. We even have Annie lose her cool, again, just kind of speaking to how, tortured she is at the minute through smacking Neuman. I thought that was very ballsy to do, and I expected Neuman to not pop her head, but to flex back after the punch to at least make her nose bleed and be on the edge of a head pop, but she managed to restrain herself, and that's when we get a nice scene between Annie and Frenchie, just kind of continuing along the whole thing that is going on with both of their stories. And, he's worried if he's going to tell Kimiko that she'll hate him, or even worse, won't. Obviously, Frenchie is looking to kind of be punished because the guilt is eating him alive. And it has done so for years, but now it is very much so at its breaking point. And just jumping to that bit at the end, he turns himself into the police. Now, I don't know if this will stick, because knowing the boys, they could just do a thing where, despite him committing to what he did to that police officer, with MM having the connections he has to Mallory, the president, they could just pull him out, even against his will, or they might just go through with it. He might just go through the process, but then that just, puts Frenchie completely to the side. If he can't really be involved in things, how do you really visit his character too much, other than some introspective scenes of him continuing to torture himself? So you have to think that he's still not going to be actually going to prison, but I could be wrong about that. I would love to know any theories that you have. And speaking of the freaking soup farm animals, this is where we get that scene from the trailer with all the bull there, the freaking sheep. And I have to say, I know some people hate it with the nitpickiness, but the plot armor was in full swing here. You know, I just feel like, you know, there's a massive group of people, and one of those sheep could have, and there was multiple sheep. Granted, I know they were swinging for the ball and stuff, but, you know, I do feel like it was kind of a bit convenient and contrived that they all managed to make it into the barn way, even if it was Annie who could maybe take a little bit of damage. But, you know, not a big deal, but plot armor is quite often a thing in moments like this. This is when we learn that Samir is in the barn and there's only one dose of the virus left. So their plan, since, you know, it was like kind of switched to a bit of a horror-y, thrillery thing here, because those sheep were like, you know, the way they played it with the sweeping by, they also had vampiric teeth. They were like, you know, being hunted by vampire sheeps. It was pretty nuts. So they figured they would inject a dead body with the virus, put it out there. That way, all the sheep would obviously get the virus and drop dead. And that is exactly what happened. And so, as Stan Edgar didn't provide the virus, his presidential pardon wasn't in effect. But on the way home, his driver, on the way back to prison, his head ends up popping. And Neuman, I'm guessing, initially I was like, wait, is Neuman going to kill him? Because I don't know. But I think with the vulnerable look on her face, she, after, you know, the assumed loss of Samir because Butcher cut off his foot, I think she just kind of wanted her father figure back, if you will. So I didn't expect Stan Edgar to continue on beyond this episode. I thought it was just like hey, he's back, it's cool, he's actually serving a purpose. But no, it seems he's going to be in the shadows, and I really wonder where that's going to go, because obviously Neuman has her own plan about things and, you know, her presidential ambitions and stuff. And how can Stan Edgar help out with that? Obviously, she wants protection against Homelander, so with Stan Edgar's very crafty ways, maybe he's just going to really commit himself to helping her with that issue. Now, at the very end of the episode, this is what I mean through Homelander taking the next stage of, you know, shedded humanity, and the next stage ultimately in his supe domination ideology. And that is where, when he gives that speech, he says, in order to save America, save the world for our kids, do your part, we're going to have to do some terrible, violent, and even cruel things. So they're now going to take the approach of no longer being celebrities, but rather these wrathful gods. And that when the time comes, they need to answer the call. So this might not go into effect right away, but at some point, Homelander's going to blow that whistle, and they're going to reveal themselves to the world, kind of like in, I guess you could say, an Invincible way, with how, you know, you had Omni-Man basically not be what everyone thought he was, and, you know, pull the plug. So maybe they really are gearing up to that moment in where the public, especially with a lot of the home teamers maybe being on board with this anyway, they're going to go out there, do things like what Homelander did at the end of season 2 through killing someone, but kind of doing that on a bigger scale, and, you know, nobody can really question them. And sure, there will be a lot of divide on the spectrum of Starlighters in the public and home teamers, but you will be getting some people being like, oh no, you know, I know this is what it is, but this is the way it's got to be done. Like, Homelander's right, man. This is the way to save America. Do you know what I mean? So that's going to be crazy when we get to that this season. And this is where we get that moment where Homelander thinks he's found the leak because there was calls to MM on Ashley's boyfriend's phone. But it turns out that Ashley was the one who planted that there, especially after she had motivation in her own Ashley guilt-free ways after he broke up with her earlier on in the episode. But, you know, you have Sage there the whole time being like, well, I know this isn't the guy, and, you know, I'm looking at you, A-Train, so when is she going to pull that card? And then, at the very end, with Butcher and Joe Kessler, it's revealed that he took Samir, and, again, notice how Samir, kind of after Butcher looks at Joe, he looks over there, and they don't make it incredibly obvious, but he's not really seeing what Butcher is seeing, and he reveals, you're going to make us more of that virus. And I'm so intrigued where that's going to go, because, you know, obviously the plan is to use it on Homelander. Butcher somehow, and this is something I want to know, how does he know it's not strong enough to take out Homelander just yet? Because I assume if he got a strong enough dose, he would be infected with that virus, and wouldn't he be chronically from there on out having that disease of the boils and all the disgusting features that gives you? Like, or does Homelander's powers, somehow fight that. I mean, I don't see how. If it attaches itself to the V in your bloodstream, surely Homelander would be compromised even with how it is right now. Granted that they don't even have any virus anymore because the last dose was used. And you know what? I wonder if Neuman could even get infected with the virus that she herself was developing. And will Butcher inform the boys of what he's doing? Maybe not, because I don't think, Annie, Huey, and MM and whatnot will not really be on board with that. So with that being said, guys, that was another episode of The Boys. I enjoyed it. Was it as crazy as last week's episode? I mean, that's not really the determining factor of quality for me, but did I enjoy it as much? I would say that is still going along swimmingly for me, if that makes sense. I don't really have too many crazy issues other than some, nitpicks of criticism here and there. But the entertainment factor is always off the scale for me. So, yeah, I'm enjoying myself. Are you still enjoying it? Any theories that you have, let me know down in that comment section. Genuinely can't wait to hear what some of you are thinking with regards to what could happen in the next episode. But I'm gonna love you and leave you now, so consider leaving a like, especially if you got this far. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow boys and supes in the next video. Goodbye.